Chapter 4. What frightened the fair Gwen? Freak's not in my room for 10 minutes before he sets me straight on the fair Gwen. He's able to hump down the steps by himself, except it makes him sort of out of breath. You can hear him wheezing, or I guess you'd call it panting, like a dog does on a hot day. When he gets into my room, I close the bulkhead door, and he goes, "Cool, you get to live down here all by yourself?" I eat upstairs with Grim and Graham. Freak works himself up onto the foot of my bed and uses a pillow to make himself comfortable. I'm pretty dim down here. It's pretty dim down here, only the daylight from one basement window, but it catches him just right and makes his eyes shine. "Graham must be your grandmother," he says. "Grim would be, I suppose, a sobriquet of your grandfather, based on his demeanor." I go, "Huh?" Freak grins and pushes back his yellow hair, and he goes, "Pardon my vocabulary. Sobriquet means nickname, and demeanor means expression. I merely postulated that you call your grandfather Grim because he's grim. Postulate means, I know, I say, which is a lie, except I can guess what he means. Figure it out that way. So how come you call your mom Fair Guinevere? Is that a nickname?" Freak is shaking his head. I can see he's trying not to let on that he's laughing inside. "Guinevere," he finally says, catching the breath. "The Fair Guinevere from the legend of King Arthur. You know about King Arthur, right?" I shrug. The only King Arthur I know is the brand of flour Graham uses, and if I say that, I'll really sound like a butthead. He goes, "My mom's name is Gwen, so sometimes I call her the Fair Guinevere or the Fair Gwen. King Arthur was the first king of England, way back when there were still dragons and monsters in the world. Arthur was this wimpy little kid, an orphan, and there was this magic sword stuck in a big stone, okay? The old king had died, and whoever could pull the sword from the stone proved he was the next king. All these big tough dudes came from all over to yank at the sword. They couldn't budge it. One day this wimpy little kid tried it when nobody was looking, and the sword slipped out like it was stuck in butter. So he was the king, this little kid?" Freak nods. He's really into the story, and he's making shapes in the air with his hands. This is the first time for me, hearing Freak really talk the right way. I know one thing. When he's talking, you can't take your eyes off him. His hands are moving, and it's like he's really seeing it. The story about an old king. Arthur's magical sword is called Excalibur, and the Fair Guinevere is the pretty girl who becomes his queen. Fair, in those days, meant the same as beautiful does now. Anyhow, Arthur got bored just sitting around. He invited all the knights of England to come live in the castle. They all ate supper at this round table, which is why they called the Knights of the Round Table. Every now and then King Arthur would send them off to special secret mission, which is, in the old days, they called quest. They had to slay dragons and monsters and evil knights. I assume you know what a knight wears into battle. I think so, but I like hearing Freak talk, so I go, "Better tell me." And that's when I find out why he's so interested in some clanky old knights. Because Freak really lights up, and he goes, "The knights were like the first human version of robots. They wore this metal armor to protect them and make them invincible. When I get my stuff unpacked, I'll show you the pictures. It's pretty amazing, really, that hundreds of years before they had computers, they were really already attempting to exceed the design limitations of the human body." I go, "Huh?" And Freak sort of chuckles to himself like he expected me to go, "Huh?" And he says, "The design limitations of the human body, like we're not bulletproof and we can't crush rocks with our bare hands. And if we touch hot stove, we get burned. King Arthur wanted to improve his men, so he made them armor-plated. When he programmed them to go out and do these quests, slay the dragons and so on, which is sort of how they program robots now." I go, "I thought there weren't any real robots, just in the movies." Boy, does this make his eyes blaze. Like, whoa, talk about laser beams. He's like fuming, so upset he can hardly talk. Finally gets control of himself, and he goes, "I suppose I must make allowances for your ignorance. On the subject of robots, you were clearly misinformed. Robots are not just in movies. Robotics, the science of designing and building functional robots, is a huge industry. There are thousands of robot units presently in use. Millions of them. They don't look like robots you see in movies, of course, because they're designed according to function. Many robotic devices are in fact sophisticated assembly units, machines that put together cars and trucks and computers. For instance, the space shuttle has a robot arm." "Right," I say. "I saw that on TV." Freak sighs and rolls his eyes. "Ah, yes," he says. "Television, the opiate of the masses." For about the 11th time I go, "Huh? Opiate is a drug," he says. "Massive, that means large and heavy. Thus, the television is the drug of fatheads, opiate of the masses." "You don't have a TV?" "Of course I have a television," he says. "How else would I watch Star Trek? Matter of fact, I watch tons of tube. But I also read tons of books, and I can figure out what's true and what's fake, which isn't always easy. Books are like truth serum. If you don't read, you can't figure out what's real. This time I don't say huh, because then I might have to explain how I'm an LD, and reading books is the last thing I want to do right after trimming my toenails with a lawnmower, gargling nails, and eating worms for breakfast. Of course, Freak has probably already guessed I'm learning disabled, because he's had to look around my room and it isn't exactly the public library. I'll lend you some of my books, he says. Cool, I say, like it's just what I've been waiting for, another chance to prove I'm a butthead. Then we both hear it at the same time, this voice calling his name and sounding real worried. The Fair Gwen, he says. I gotta beam out of here. I go up and open the bulkhead door, and his mother is in the backyard, and she's looking at the little red wagon. She catches sight of me and coming up out of the down under, and it's like somebody shot her, like she's scared out of her mind. Kevin, she says. I'm looking for a little boy. Freak is huffing and puffing as he humps himself up the steps, and the Fair Gwen grabs Freak and puts him in the wagon, and I swear, she almost runs home. Like, if she doesn't get away quick, something really bad is going to happen. Freak is in the wagon. He's trying to look back at me, trying to shrug his shoulders and let me know he doesn't understand what got into the Fair Gwen. But I know. It's pretty simple, really. She's scared of me. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Spitting image. There's a place I go inside my head sometimes. It's cool and dim, and you can float like a cloud. No, you are a cloud, the kind you see in the sky on a windy day. The way you keep changing shape, except you can't really see it changing. It sort of just happens, and suddenly you realize the cloud that looks like a big hand with fat fingers now looks like a catcher's mitt, or a big soft TV set. Like that. Anyhow, I went there right after the Fair Gwen ran off, with a look on her face like, what was he doing with my poor little boy, stealing him away in a wagon? What I do is lie on the floor under my bed where you can just barely see the bed springs and stuff because it's so dark. Before long, I'm somewhere else, sort of floating. It's so cool and empty in there. You don't have to think about anything. You're nothing. You're nobody. Nothing matters. You're not even there. Time out. Except this time, I can't stay as long as I'd like because Graham is knocking on the door, going, Maxwell, Max, are you there? Please answer me, dear. It's important. Yeah, right. But I wedge out from under the bed. There's getting to be less and less room under there, and I dust myself off and open the door. There's no lock. But Graham has this thing about waiting until I say come in. She makes a big deal about not intruding. Maxwell, she says, and she takes a little step inside the room. You can tell she'd rather not be in here. She makes this face because the place is dark and messy and probably it smells like my socks or whatever. Max, dear, I'm sorry to bother you, but, I never come into the basement, but I just got a call from Gwen Avery, and I think it's important. Uh-oh, I'm thinking. Now the Fair Gwen is calling up my Graham, probably to report a great hulking beast that lives in the cellar, and I close up inside, waiting for the worst. She called to say how sorry she was, Graham is saying. Huh? I guess she came to pick up her little boy. Is that right? You and Kevin were making friends? Making friends? What a wet idea that is. But Graham gets her feelings hurt pretty easy, so I don't actually say that. What I say is, yeah, I guess so. Graham is uneasy. I can see her eyes flitting nervously around the room, like she's crossing the border into a really foreign country. This is a good a place as any to mention that even though Graham is my grandmother, she doesn't look like a granny. She looks more like a mother because she was, as always says, a mere child myself when my real mother was born. Well, I get the impression poor Gwen wasn't expecting to see you looking so big, and now she thinks she's offended you. Does that make any sense? I guess so. You know her, huh? Oh my, yes, says Graham. Gwen was a good friend of your mother's. They were both pregnant at the same time. Then later on, you and little Kevin went to the same daycare. Did you know that? I give a shrug because I don't really like Graham to know how much I remember about way back then. Graham is saying, she said she especially wanted me to tell you this, Max. She said she's delighted that you and Kevin are going to be friends. That's the word she used, delighted. And she's inviting you to supper. First thing without thinking, I say, do I have to? Graham reaches out and she puts her hand on my shoulder, real light and feathery. You can feel how nervous she is just to touch me and how it makes her uncomfortable to have to look up at me because, did I mention, I'm a lot bigger than Graham? Bigger than Grim, too. Bigger than most people. It's true. Graham says she feels bad about how she treated you, Maxwell, dear, and she wants to make it up to you. You don't have to go, but it would be the right thing to do. It was no big deal, I say. She just ran away at all. I guess I scared her. It wasn't you, Gram says. No? Then who was it? Who was it scared her? Now she got her tongue stuck, and you can see her swallowing it in her throat like her mouth is dry. I'll just leave that to Gwen, she says. She's quite a remarkable young woman, raising that poor boy all on her own. He's not a poor boy, I say. You should hear him talk. I think the rest of him is so small because his brain is so big. Yes, says Gram. Well. Grandma's always saying that. Well, like it means something, which I guess it does to her. Anyhow, I agree to have supper with Freak and his mom, even though the idea of it makes me feel tensed up, like there's a hand inside my stomach, and the hand is, making a fist. It turns out to be not so bad. The fair Gwen right away, she's beaming at me, bouncing around the kitchen and talking a mile a minute. So fast, the words kind of smush together. So did Susan excuse your grandmother? Meant your mom and it with the accident until she got married and excuse me, I'm never could abide it and I'm always the crazy and scary. Is it to you to say that? Won't be offended? It's like this delay while I sort it out, and then I go, yeah, Gram told me. And the stuff about her knowing my father and thinking he was sick in the head, I decided no comment is the way to go. You were the cutest little baby, Gwen says. I remember like it was yesterday. We were all of us living over in the tenements in those days because the rent was so cheap, and we were all just starting out. Freak is on the floor digging through the packing boxes of pots and pans and stuff. He's almost inside his box. All you can see is his funny little rear end sticking out. You'd think he was maybe 2 years old. That's how small he is, until you notice where his leg brace makes up a lump in his pants. From inside the box he goes, Hey Gwen, leave the guy alone, huh? You're going spastic. Am I? Gwen asks. She's at the counter, going through drawers and looking for spoons or whatever. Sorry, Max. That is, I'm sorry we got off to the wrong foot. It's just Freak's head popped out of the box and he's got a wicked know-it-all grin. What she means is, you're spitting image of your old man. Gwen says, Kevin, please. And her voice, real small, like she's embarrassed. Yeah, I say, everybody says that. That they do? I shrug. Was it really such a big deal for a boy to look like his father? Which is a typical butthead thinking. Because, of course, it's a big deal. If your father happens to be in prison, which everybody in town knows about, it's not like there's any secret about what he did or why he's there, except everybody acts like it should be a secret. And the bigger I grow and the more I look like my old man, the worse it gets. You really knew him, I say? I mean, him and my mom, when they were together? Not very well, Gwen says. She's looking for a knife to slice open a package of hot dogs. I never saw much of your mom after they got married. He did it. Difficult for your mother to have any friends. He made it difficult for your mother to not have any friends. There's a knife on the table, and I pick it up and hand it to Fair Gwen. She doesn't flinch away, and I decide she is okay. She's really pretty cool. So, Freak is saying, when do we eat? My fuel cells are depleted. Supper is great. The Fair Gwen makes this really tasty potato salad with spices and stuff. Way better than the mushy stuff Gram makes. And we have hot dogs fried in a pan with the buns toasted with butter crisp just the way I like. And 2 kinds of relish and 3 kinds of mustard and red onions cut up real small. We sit out in the backyard eating from paper plates, and Freak tells robot stories that were so strange and funny I'm laughing with him like a maniac, and then I'm choking and Freak is pounding me on the back. Expel the object, Freak shouts. Regurgitate, you big moron, and he gives me another big thump, and I cough up this yucky mess, but I'm still laughing, so hard my nose is running. What a goon, except it really is funny, me trying to sneeze a hot dog through my nose, and we're both laughing like total morons. This is great, Gwen says, looking at Freak and me. I'm so glad we decided to move back, I feel like we're all getting a fresh start. It's time to go home. Gram gets nervous if I'm not back before dark. Everything seems really great, just like Gwen says, except when I lie down on my bed, it hits me. Boom! I'm crying like a baby. And the really weird thing is, I'm happy. The end of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Close Encounter of the Turd Kind. 4th of July, right? Everybody goes nuts. The dads are drinking and having their cookouts, and moms are trying to keep all their brats from blowing their precious little pinkies off with cherry bombs, and the kids are running wild through the backyards. It's like no rules apply. And that makes everything really edgy. If you know what I mean. Like, let's have a blast, and who cares what happens? Don't get the wrong idea. I love the 4th. It's just that people tend to get all choked up about firecracker holidays, and they don't see what's really going on, which, like I say, is the dads swilling beer and acting numb. That's the basic formula. Not that Grim ever swills anything stronger than root beer. No way. The poison never crossed his lips, he likes to say, even though I've seen a picture of him in the army, and that sure looks like a bottle of beer in his hand, and he's got the same whacked by a hammer grin the dudes always get when they've been drinking. Anyhow, this is the first year I get to go to the fireworks without Grim and Graham, which I've never understood, because it's right down by the mill pond where I've always been allowed to go for years, so why should it make a difference just because about 1,000,000 people show up to watch the rockets red glare over that smelly pond? The real deal this year is that I get to go with Freak, which Graham thinks is a good idea because she's afraid he'll get crushed or something. She actually thinks people are going to step on him, which just goes to show how brainless she can be sometimes and scared of everything. I mean, nobody steps on little kids down there, so why should they step on Freak? Turns out the thing to worry about is not kid stompers, but beer swillers, like I mentioned before. Because Freak and I are still a couple of blocks from the pond, just kind of easing our way along when these punks start mouthing off. Hey you, Mutt and Jeff, Frankenstein, and Igor. Don't look around. I'm talking to you, boneheads. What is this, a freak show? I know that voice. Tony D, they call him, Blade. He's at least 17. He's already been to juvie court 3-4 times. I heard he cut a guy with a razor. He almost died. And everybody says the best way to handle Tony D and his gang is you just avoid him. Cross the street, hide, whatever it takes. Yeah, you, he goes. He's doing his hippity walk, strutting along. He's got these fancy cool cowboy boots with metal toes. Yeah, Andre the Giant and the Dwarf. Hold on a sec. I want a word with you. Only the way he talks, he gets a wanna avoid weecha. Except it's bad enough having to listen to the creep. I don't want to have to spell the dumb way he talks. Anyhow, big mistake. We stop and wait for Tony D. Alias, the Bad News Blade. Got any dudes? He asks, pretending like he's friendly. He's a couple feet away, but you can smell the beer on his breath. Also smells like he ate something dead, for instance, roadkill, but maybe that's my imagination. Pay attention, Tony D says. I asked, did you got any? Freak, his chest is all puffed out and his chin looks hard and he's looking right up at Tony D and says, got any what? Tony D has his hands on his hips and his punkster pals are trying to get closer, working through the crowd. He loans a Freak and he says, boomers, you little freak, M80s, maybe a rack of cherry bombs. Is that what's making a lump in your pocket, huh? Freak starts to hump himself away, trying to walk faster than he really can, which makes his leg brace bump against the ground. Come on, Maxwell, he says over his shoulder. Ignore the cretin. Blade goes, hey, what? And he moves right in front of Freak. Want to say that again, little freak man? Freak says, cretin. C-R-E-T-I-N. Defined as one who suffers from mental deficiency. Hearing how little tiny Freak is dissing the fearsome Tony D, alias Blade, I can't help it. I laugh out loud. Tony D is looking up at me and he's showing his white teeth. I swear they've been sharpened to look like vampire teeth. And I go, uh-oh. And start to get real cold inside. Real icy. Because I can see the Blade is trying to make up his mind. Is he going to fight me? Or is he going to kill me quick? Just then I hear a whoop of a siren, and like a miracle, this cop car comes out of nowhere, heading for the mill pond. And Blade takes the one look, and he and his punksters are out of there, burning rubber in their Reeboks. Freak goes, phew. That was a close encounter of the turd kind, and it kind of takes me a second to get the joke, but then I'm laughing, amazed he can be so cool about it, like it was no big deal that Tony D was after us. You can take him, right? He asks a couple minutes later. I go, are you kidding me? You can't just fight Blade. You have to fight his gang, too. You mean you couldn't take him? And I was giving him lip? That's about the size of it. Freak goes, oh my gosh. And he's shrieking and laughing and whooping it up so loud that everybody is looking at us like we're total goons, which isn't far from the truth. Freak hasn't got his crutch tonight, just a leg brace, and he's laughing so hard he falls down. Not that he has far to go. Anyhow, I pick him up and I'm amazed how light he is. Like it's nothing for me to lift him. And maybe that's where I get the idea, because later, when we're down by the pond and the first of the rockets is streaking up, Freak is making a fuss because he can't see. There are so many people crowded around, all we can see are feet and knees, and people are lifting their little kids up to see the fireworks explode like hot pink flowers in the sky. So I just sort of reach down without thinking and pick up Freak and set him on my shoulders. He's kind of trembly up there until he grabs hold of my hair and steadies himself. And then the first really big rocket whams off, a humongous thud. I can feel it in my stomach, and Freak is shouting, ah, right. And I know it's okay. He's not flipped out because I picked him up and put him on my shoulders like he was a little kid instead of possibly the smartest human being on the whole world. Magnesium, he shouts as the white sparkles glitter down on the pond. Potassium chlorate. as the shells go womp, 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 and everybody goes, ooh, potassium nitrate, sulfur, aluminum. And after a burst of hot red fire in the sky, Freak tugs my hair and screams, copper! That's copper powder combusting with oxygen. And when the fire blossoms are flashing blue, he goes, good old strontium nitrate. And I'm thinking, whoa, is there anything this little dude doesn't know? At the end, like always, they have a thing they call the grand finale. And when they just go nuts and light off everything at once, and it sounds like World War III, whizzing and banging and popping, and there's so much hot stuff falling from the sky you can hear it sizzling in the pond. Freak keeps up on shouting out the names of chemicals and elements until the last spark dies in the scummy pond and the crowd cheers and everybody tries to leave all at once, like a bunch of morons. And that's the end of chapter 6.